When people think about the fall of Rome, the same scene usually comes to mind. Barbarians charging the walls, legions falling apart, emperors dying in intrigue inside marble palaces. Yet empires do not collapse only because of blows from the outside. The real collapse, most of the time, begins inside. And one of the most destructive forces that rots from within is almost always money. Rome did not collapse only because of invasions or because of moral decay. Rome collapsed together with the collapse of its money. And the lesson given by that collapse is still valid today for every modern economy that thinks it can play with money and not pay the price. First, let us set the stage. For centuries, the backbone of the Roman economy was the silver denarius. First minted around 201 before Christ, this coin was almost entirely pure silver and was trusted not only within the empire but beyond its borders as well. Roman soldiers were paid with it. Merchants wanted it. Ordinary people protected their savings with it. The denarius was not merely a medium of exchange. It was trust turned into metal. Rome's power and the value of this money were tied to each other. As long as people believed in Rome, they believed in its money too. But maintaining an empire is extremely expensive. Legions had to be paid, roads and aqueducts had to be built, wars had to be financed. By the 2nd century after Christ, Rome was already under serious strain. On one side it was defending its borders against Germanic tribes, on another it was fighting the Parthians in the east, and at the same time it was dealing with unrest inside. Tax revenues could not keep up with the speed of military spending. As a result, the emperors resorted to a very old method: debasing the money. Instead of collecting more taxes from the people, which always caused backlash, they began reducing the silver content inside the denarius. The numbers show this clearly. Under Augustus, who ruled during the empire's first great era, the denarius contained about 95% silver. Under Caracalla in the early 3rd century, that ratio fell to around 50%. By the time of Gallienus in the middle of the 3rd century, the silver content in the denarius had fallen below even 5%. A coin that had once been made almost entirely of precious metal had now turned into a bronze piece covered only with a thin layer of silver. The people could both see this and feel it. After that, inflation arrived. Prices began to rise because money was no longer tied to real value. A measure of wheat that could once be bought with 1 denarius soon began to cost dozens of denarii. This was not merely a theoretical economic problem. It was a destruction that directly overturned the lives of ordinary Romans. Soldiers began demanding higher pay because of rising living costs. Merchants did not want to accept the debased coins. They turned to barter or payment in gold. Local economies returned to direct exchange of goods because trust in the currency had disappeared. And as trust declined, the emperors printed even lower quality money, as though quantity could replace value. Thus, the vicious cycle deepened. This was the same cycle that repeated throughout history in many inflation crises. This crisis reached its peak in the period known as the crisis of the 3rd century. Between 235 and 284 after Christ, Rome experienced nearly half a century of invasions, epidemics, civil wars, political chaos, and economic collapse. Emperors were rising to the throne and falling from it at a dizzying speed. Some ruled only a few months before being assassinated. But behind this political turmoil lay a financial system that had stopped functioning. Taxes were being collected in money that was becoming more worthless by the day. Farmers were abandoning their lands to escape the tax burden. Trade networks were breaking apart, and the Roman state was resorting to desperate measures, from price restrictions to forced labor obligations, to keep the system standing. But none of these solved the problem. One of the emperors, Diocletian, tried to stop this course. In 301 after Christ, he issued the Edict on Maximum Prices, setting maximum prices for more than 1,000 goods and services, from grain to labor wages. Those who violated these rules were to be punished by death. But the result was a complete disaster. Because when the money itself had become worthless, it was impossible to stabilize prices by decree. The black market grew rapidly and official trade almost collapsed. People quickly understood this. You cannot make broken money sound again through law. In the end, Rome had to abandon the denarius entirely. Around 312 after Christ, Constantine the Great introduced the gold solidus, whose purity was stable. This new currency brought back a certain degree of stability and continued to exist for centuries in the Eastern Roman, that is, the Byzantine Empire. But at that point, the Western Roman Empire was already fatally weakened. The debasement of the denarius had hollowed out Rome's economic center from within. Armies could no longer be sustained. Trade networks had unraveled. Trust had vanished. Rome's fall was not a sudden disaster that happened in a single day. It was a long dissolution, and the collapse of its monetary system was one of the sharpest parts of that unraveling. So what does all of this say to us today? It says this: the destruction of money is, in the end, also the destruction of empires. Rome thought it could deceive its people with money that looked the same on the outside but carried less real value inside. Modern states also believe they can do something similar by printing paper money, manipulating interest rates, or melting debt away through inflation. But the result does not change. The people pay the price, wealth erodes, and trust disintegrates. Rome learned this truth in a very harsh way. If we ignore the same lesson, we will pay the same price too. History did not stop teaching humanity after Rome. In every major inflation crisis seen from that day to this, the same pattern repeated. States devalue money in order to cover their rising costs. Elites protect themselves with real assets. Ordinary people grow poorer. Rome's currency crisis is the first great and full-scale example of this in history, almost like a blueprint of collapse. When we come to the 20th century, these echoes become even clearer. After the First World War, Germany found itself under the crushing burden of the reparations imposed by the Treaty of Versailles. The government printed more marks to meet these obligations, just as Rome once tried to solve the problem by striking more coins. By 1923, hyperinflation had spiraled out of control. A loaf of bread that had cost 1 mark before the war had risen to more than 200 billion marks by the autumn of that year. People were carrying their wages in wheelbarrows. Pensioners were being pushed into hunger because the savings of a lifetime had been wiped out. And once again, just as in Rome, while the debts of those who owed money were erased by inflation, those who owned land, factories, or foreign currencies emerged even stronger. Money had lost its meaning, and this economic collapse fed the political radicalization that prepared the ground for Hitler's rise. Zimbabwe followed the same path in the early 2000s. Faced with land seizures, falling production, and rising debts, the government again turned to the printing press. By 2008, inflation had reached an unbelievable point. The annual rate was 89.76 trillion%. Prices were nearly doubling every day. Shops could not keep up with changing the price tags. In the end, Zimbabwe had to abandon its own currency completely, and people started using US dollars or South African rand instead. Once again, a government believed it could cheat reality. Once again, the cost fell on the people. But the issue is not limited only to extreme examples. Even in modern developed economies, Rome's pattern continues to live on. Think of the United States. In 1971, President Richard Nixon separated the dollar from the gold standard and cut the last tie between money and a tangible value. From that moment on, the dollar turned into what economists call fiat money. and central banks ready to create trillions of new money in times of crisis. This means that the next great collapse will not remain limited to a single country or a single empire. Its effects will spread across the entire world. And if history guides us, the greatest cost will once again be paid not by asset-owning elites, but by the millions who depend on wages, pensions, and savings held in currencies that are becoming more fragile by the day. So what lesson should you as an individual take from Rome's currency crisis? First, you must understand that inflation is not an accident. Inflation is not merely a mishap. It is a policy. It is the silent tax that has been eating away at empires from within for 2,000 years. Second, you must grasp that real wealth is not found in numbers on a screen or in pieces of paper, but in things that can preserve their value even when money loses it. In land, in skill, in productive businesses, in resources. Third, you must never assume that stability will last forever. Romans in the 1st century would have laughed if someone had told them that one day their money would become worthless. Germans in 1913 would have found the idea ridiculous that people would need wheelbarrows to carry money. Zimbabweans in the 1980s believed that independence would bring them prosperity. But every time, the same story unfolded. Rome's collapse shows us this. Financial systems collapse first slowly, then all at once. Because